Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes again for another week of story time. And we pick up where we left off with Treasure Island, Chapter 20 Silver's Embassy. Sure enough, there were two men just outside the stockade, one of them waving a white cloth, the other no less a person than Silver himself, standing placidly by. It was still quite early, the coldest morning that I think I ever was abroad in. A chill pierced into the morrow. The sky was bright and cloudless overhead, and the tops of trees shone rosily in the sun. But where Silver stood with his lieutenant, all was still in shadow, and they waded knee-deep in a low white vapor that had crawled during the night out of the morass. The chill and the vapor taken together told a poor tale of the island. It was plainly damp, feverish, unhealthy spot. "Keep indoors, men," said the captain. 10-1, this is a trick. Then he hailed the buccaneer. "Who goes there? Stand, or we fire." "Flag of truce," cried Silver. The captain was in the porch, keeping himself carefully out of the way of a treacherous shot, should any be intended. He turned and spoke to us. "Doctors, watch on the lookout. Dr. Livesey, take the north side, if you please. Jim, the east. Gray, west. The watch below, all hands to load muskets. Lively, men, and careful." And then he turned again to the mutineers. "And what do you want with your flag of truce?" he cried. This time it was the other man who replied. "Captain Silver, sir, to come aboard and make terms," he shouted. "Captain Silver? Don't know him. Who is he?" cried the captain, and we could hear him adding to himself, "Captain, is it? My heart, and here's promotion." Long John answered for himself. "Me, sir. These poor lads have chosen me captain, after your desertion, sir," laying a particular emphasis upon the word desertion. "We're willing to submit if we can come to terms, and no bones about it. All I ask is your word, Captain Smollett, to let me safe and sound out of this here stockade, and 1 minute to get out o' shot before a gun is fired." "My man," said Captain Smollett, "I have not the slightest desire to talk to you. If you wish to talk to me, you can come, that's all. If there's any treachery, it'll be on your side, and Lord help you." "That's enough, Captain," shouted Long John cheerily. "A word from you's enough. I know a gentleman, and you may lay to that." We could see the man who carried the flag of truce attempting to hold Silver back, nor was that wonderful, seeing how cavalier had been the captain's answer. But Silver laughed at him aloud and slapped him on the back as if the idea of alarm had been absurd. Then he advanced to the stockade, threw over his crutch, got a leg up, and with great vigor and skill succeeded in surmounting the fence and dropping safely to the other side. I will confess that as far as it was, too much taken up with what was going on to be the slightest use as sentry. Indeed, I had already deserted my eastern loophole and crept up behind the captain, who was now seated himself on the threshold, with his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands, and his eyes fixed on the water as it bubbled out of the old iron kettle in the sand. He was whistling, "Come, lassies and lads." Silver had terrible hard work getting up the knoll. What with the steepness of the incline, the thick tree stumps, and the soft sand, he had his crutch were as helpless as a ship in stays. But he stuck to it like a man in silence, and at last arrived before the captain, whom he saluted in the handsomest style. He was tricked out of it in his best. An immense blue coat, thick with brass buttons, hung as low as to his knees, and a fine laced hat was set on the back of his head. "Here you are, my man," said the captain, raising his head. "You had better sit down." "You ain't going to let me inside, Captain," complained Long John. "It's main cold, It's a main cold morning, to be sure, sir, to sit outside upon the sand. Why, Silver, said the captain, if you had pleased to be an honest man, you might have been sitting in your galley. It's your own doing. You're either my ship's cook, and then you were treated handsome, or Captain Silver, a common mutineer and pirate, and you can go hang. Well, Captain, returned the sea cook, sitting down as he was bidden on the sand, you'll have to give me a hand up, that's all. A sweet, pretty place you have it here. Ah, there's Jim. The top of the morning to you, Jim, doctor. Jim? Doctor, here's my service. Why, there you all are together, like a happy family, in a manner of speaking. If you have anything to say, my man, better say it, said the captain. Right you were, Captain Smollett, replied Silver. Duty is duty, to be sure. Well, now, you look here. There was a good lay of yours last night. I don't deny it was a good lay. Some of you pretty handy with a handspike end. And I'll not deny neither, but what some of my people was shook. Maybe all was shook. Maybe I was shook myself. Maybe that's why I'm here for terms. But you mark me, Captain, it won't do twice by thunder. We'll have to do sentry go and ease off a point or so on the rum. Maybe you think we're all a sheet in the wind's eye, but I tell you, I was sober. I was only dog-tired, and if I'd awoke a second sooner, I'd have caught you at the act, I would. He wasn't dead when I got round to him, not he. Well, says Captain Smollett, as cool as he can be, all that Silver said was a riddle to him, but you would never have guessed it from his tone. As for me, I began to have an inkling. Ben Gunn's last words came back to my mind. I began to suppose that he had paid the buccaneers a visit while they all lay drunk together round the fire, and I reckoned up with glee that we had only 14 enemies to deal with. Well, here it is, said Silver. We want that treasure, and we'll have it. That's our point. You would just as soon save your lives, I reckon, and that's yours. I have a chart, haven't you? That's as may be, replied the captain. Oh, well, you have, I know that, returned Long John. You needn't be so husky with a man. There's ain't a particle of service in that, and you may lay to it. What I mean is, we want your chart. Now, I never meant you no harm myself. That won't do with me, my man, interrupted the captain. We won't exactly what you meant to do. We don't care, for now, you see, you can't do it. The captain looked at him calmly and proceeded to fill a pipe. If Abe Gray, Silver broke out. Avast there, cried Mr. Smollett. Gray told me nothing, and I asked him nothing. And what's more, I would see you and him and this whole island blown clean out of the water, into blazes first. So there's my mind for you, my man, on that. This little whiff of temper seemed to cool Silver down. He had been growing nettled before, but now he pulled himself together. Like enough, said he, I would set no limits to what gentlemen might consider shipshape, or might not, as the case were. And seeing as how you were about to take a piping, Captain, I'll make so free as do likewise. And he filled a pipe and lighted it, and the two men sat silently smoking for quite a while, now looking each other in the face and stopping their tobacco, now leaning forward to spit. It was as good a play to see them. Now resumed Silver. Here it is. You give us the chart to get the treasure by, and drop shooting poor seamen and stoving their heads in while they sleep. You do that, and we'll offer you a choice. Either you come aboard along of us, once the treasure is shipped, and then I'll give you my affidavy upon my word of honor, to clap you somewhere safe offshore, or safe ashore. Or, if that ain't to your fancy, some of my hands being rough and having old scores on account of hazing, then you can stay here, you can. We'll divide stores with you, man for man, and I'll give my affidavy, as before, to speak to the first ship I sight, and I'll send them here to pick you up. Now, you'll own that's talking. Handsomer you couldn't look to get. Now you, and I hope, raising his voice, that all hands in this here blockhouse will overhaul my words, for what is spoke to one is spoke to all. Captain Smollett rose from his seat and knocked out the ashes of his pipe in the palm of his left hand. Is that all? He asked. Every last word by thunder, answered John. Refuse that, and you've seen the last of me, but musket balls. Very good, said the captain. Now you'll hear me. If you'll come up one by one, unarmed, I'll engage to clap you all in irons and take you home to a fair trial in England. If you won't, my name is Alexander Smollett. I've flown my sovereign's colors, and I'll see you all to Davy Jones. You can't find the treasure. You can't sail the ship. There's not a man among you fit to sail the ship. You can't fight us. Gray, there, got away from 5 of you. Your ship's in irons, Master Silver. You're on a lee shore, and so you'll find. I stand here and tell you, and they're the last good words you'll get from me. For, in the name of heaven, I'll put a bullet in your back when next I meet you. Tramp, my lad, bundle out of this, please, hand over hand, and double quick. Silver's face was a picture. His eyes started in his head with wrath. He shook the fire out of his pipe. Give me a hand up, he cried. Not I, returned the captain. Who'll give me a hand up, he roared. Not a man among us moved. Growling the foulest imprecations, he crawled along the sand till he got hold of the porch and could hoist himself again upon his crutch. Then he spat into the spring. There, he cried, that's what I think of ye. Before an hour's out, I'll stove in your old blockhouse like a rum puncheon. Laugh, by thunder, laugh. Before an hour's out, ye all laugh upon the other side. Them that'll die'll be the lucky ones. And with a dreadful oath, he stumbled off, plowed down the sand, and helped across the stockade after 4 or 5 failures by a man with a flag of truce, and disappeared in an instant afterwards among the trees. Chapter 21. The Attack. As soon as Silver disappeared, the captain, who had been closely watching him, turned towards the interior of the house and found not a man of us at his post but Gray. It was the first time he had ever seen him angry. Quarters, he roared, and then, as we all slunk back into our places, Gray, he said, I'll put your name in the log. You've stood by your duty like a seaman. Mr. Trelawney, I'm surprised at you, sir. Doctor, I thought you had worn the king's coat. If that's how you served in Fontenoy, sir, you'd have better be in your berth. The doctors' watch were all black at their loopholes. The rest were all busy loading the spare muskets, and every one with a red face, you may be certain, the flea in his ear, as saying is. The captain looked for a while in silence. Then he spoke. My lads, said he, I've given Silver a broadside. I pitched it in a red hot on purpose, and before the hour's out, as he said, we shall be boarded. We're outnumbered. I needn't tell you that, but we fight in shelter. And a minute ago, I should have said we fought with discipline. I've no manner of doubt that we can drub them, if you choose. Then he went the rounds and saw, as he said, that all was clear. On the 2 short sides of the house, east and west, there were only 2 loopholes. On the south, where the porch was, 2 again. And on the north, 5. There was a round score of muskets for the 7 of us. The firewood had been built into 4 piles, tables, you might say, one about the middle of each, and on each of these tables some ammunition, and 4 loaded muskets were laid ready to the hand of the defenders. In the middle, the cutlass lay ranged. Toss out the fire, said the captain. The chill is past, and we mustn't have smoke in our eyes. The iron fire basket was carried bodily out by Mr. Trelawney, and the embers smothered among the sand. Hawkins hasn't had his breakfast. Hawkins, help yourself. And then back to your post to eat it, continued Captain Smollett. Lively now, my lad. You'll want it before you're done. Hunter, serve out a round of brandy to all hands. And, while this was going on, the captain completed, in his own mind, the plan for defense. Doctor, you will take the door, he resumed. See, and don't expose yourself. Keep within, and fire through the porch. Hunter, take the east side, there. Joyce, you stand by the west, my man. Mr. Trelawney, you are the best shot. You and Gray will take this long north side, with the 5 loopholes. It's there the danger is. If they can get up to it and fire upon us through our own ports, things would begin to look dirty. Hawkins, neither you nor I are much account at shooting. We'll stand by to load and bear a hand. As the captain had said, the chill was past. As soon as the sun had climbed above our girdle of trees, it fell with all its force upon the clearing and drank up the vapors at a draught. Soon the sand was baking and the resin melting in the logs of the blockhouse. Jackets and coats were flung aside, shirts thrown open at the neck and rolled up at the shoulders, and we stood there, each at his post, in a fever of heat and anxiety. An hour passed away. Hang them, said the captain. This is as dull as the doldrums. Gray, whistle for a wind. And just at that moment came the first news of the attack. If you please, sir, said Joyce. If I see any more, am I to fire? I told you so, cried the captain. Thank you, sir, returned Joyce with the same quiet civility. Nothing followed for a time, but the remark had set us all on alert. Straining ears and eyes, the musketeers with their pieces balanced in their hands, the captain out in the middle of the block, with his mouth very tight and a frown on his face. So some seconds passed till suddenly Joyce whipped up his musket and fired. The report had scarcely died away ere it repeated and repeated from without a scattering volley, shot behind shot, like a string of geese, from every side of the enclosure. Several bullets struck the log house, but not one entered. And as the smoke cleared away and vanished, the stockade and the woods round it looked as quiet and empty as before. Not a bow waved, not a gleam of a musket barrel betrayed the presence of our foes. Did you hit your man? Asked the captain. No, sir, replied Joyce. I believe not, sir. Next best thing I can tell, the truth, muttered Captain Smollett. Load his gun, Hawkins. How many should say there were on your side, Doctor? I know precisely, said Dr. Livesey. 3 shots were fired on this side. I saw 3 flashes, 2 close together, 1 farther west. 3, repeated the captain. And how many on yours, Mr. Trelawney? But this was not so easily answered. There had come many from the north, 7 by the squire's computation, 8 or 9 according to Gray. From the east and west only a single shot had been fired. It was plain, therefore, that the attack would be developed from the north, and that on the other 3 sides we were only to be annoyed by a show of hostilities. But Captain Smollett made no change in his arrangements. If the mutineers succeeded in crossing the stockade, he argued, they would take possession of any unprotected loophole and shoot us down like rats in our own stronghold. Nor had we much time left for us for thought. Suddenly, with a loud huzza, a little cloud of pirates leaped from the woods on the north side and ran straight on the stockade. At the same moment, the fire was once more opened from the woods, and the rifle ball sang through the doorway and knocked the doctor's musket into bits. The boarders swarmed over the fence like monkeys. Squire and Gray fired again and yet again. 3 men fell, 1 forwards into the enclosure, 2 back on the outsides. But none of these was evidently more frightened than hurt, for he was on his feet again in a crack and instantly disappeared among the trees. 2 had bit the dust. 1 had fled. 4 had made good their footing inside our defenses. while from the shelter of the woods 7 or 8 men, each evidently supplied with several muskets, kept up a hot through useless fire on the log house. The 4 who had boarded made straight before them for the building, shouting as they ran, and the men among the trees shouted back to encourage them. Several shots were fired, but such the hurry of the marksmen that not one appears to have taken effect. In a moment, the 4 pirates had swarmed up the mound and were upon us. The head of Job Anderson, the boatswain, appeared at the middle of the loophole. "At 'em, all hands," he roared in the voice of thunder. At the same moment, another pirate grasped Hunter's musket by the muzzle, wrenched it from his hands, plucked it through the loophole, and with one stunning blow laid the poor fellow senseless on the floor. Meanwhile, a third, running unarmed all around the house, appeared suddenly in the doorway and fell with his cutlass on the doctor. Our position was utterly reversed. A moment since we were firing under cover at an exposed enemy. Now it was we who lay uncovered and could not return a blow. The log house was full of smoke, to which we owed our comparative safety. Cries and confusion, the flashes and reports of pistol shots, and one loud groan rang in my ears. "Out, lads, out! And fight 'em in the open! Cutlasses!" cried the captain. I snatched a cutlass from the pile, and someone at the same time snatched another, gave me a cut across my knuckles, which I hardly felt. I dashed out the door into the clear sunlight. Someone was close behind, I knew not whom. Right in front of the doctor was pursuing his assailant down the hill, and just as my eyes fell upon him, beat down his guard and sent him sprawling on his back with a great lashing and a slash across his face. "Round the house, lads, round the house," cried the captain, and even in the hurly-burly I perceived a change in his voice. Mechanically I obeyed, turned eastwards, and with my cutlass raised, ran round the corner of the house. Next moment I was face to face with Anderson. He roared aloud, and his hanger went above my head, flashing in the sunlight. I had not time to be afraid, but as the blow still hung impending, I leaped in a trice upon one side, and missing my foot in the soft sand, rolled headlong on the slope. When I had first sallied from the door, the other mutineers had been already swarming up the palisade to make an end of us. One man in a red cap, with his cutlass in his mouth, had even got upon the top and thrown a leg across. Well, so short had been the interval that when I found my feet again, all was in the same posture. The fellow with the red cap still halfway over, another still showing his head above the top of the stockade. And yet, in this breath of time, the fight was over, and the victory was ours. Gray, following close behind me, had cut down the big boatswain ere he had time to recover from the last blow. Another had been shot at the loophole in the very act of firing into the house, and now lay in agony, the pistol still smoking in his hand. A third, as I had seen, the doctor had disposed of at a blow. Or of the fourth, who had scaled the palisade, one only remained unaccounted for, and he, having left his cutlass on the field, was now clamoring out again with the fear of death upon him. "Fire, fire from the house," cried the doctor, "and you lads back into cover." But his words were unheeded. No shot was fired, and the last boarder made good his escape and disappeared with the rest into the wood. In 3 seconds nothing remained of the attacking party but the 5 who had fallen, 4 on the inside and 1 on the outside of the palisade. The doctor and Gray and I ran full speed for the shelter. The survivors would soon be back where they had left their muskets, and at any moment the fire might recommence. The house was by this time somewhat cleared of smoke, and we saw at a glance the price we had paid for victory. Hunter lay beside his loophole, stunned, his voice, Joyce, by his, shot through the head, never to move again, while right in the center the squire was supporting the captain, one as pale as the other. "The captain's wounded," said Mr. Trelawney. "Have they run?" asked Mr. Smollett. "All that could, you may be bound," returned the doctor, "but there's 5 of them that will never run again." "5," cried the captain. "Come, that's better. 5 against 3 leaves us 4 to 9. That's better odds than we had starting. We were 7-19 then, or thought we were, and that's as bad to bear. The mutineers were soon only 8 in number, for the man shot by Mr. Trelawney on board the schooner died the same evening of his wound, but this was, of course, not known till after by the faithful party. Part 5, my sea journey and my adventure. Chapter 22, how my sea adventure began. There was no return of the mutineers, not so much as another shot out of the woods. They had got their rations for that day, as the captain put it, and we had the place to ourselves, and a quiet time to overhaul the wounded and get dinner. Squire and I cooked outside in spite of the danger, and even outside we could hardly tell what we were at, for horror of the loud groans that reached us from the doctor's patients. Out of the 8 men who had fallen in the action, only 3 still breathed. That one of the pirates who had been shot at the loophole, Hunter, and Captain Smollett of these. The first 2 were as good as dead. The mutineer, indeed, died under the doctor's knife, and Hunter, do what he could, never recovered consciousness in this world. He lingered all day, breathing loudly like the old buccaneer at home in his apoplectic fit, but the bones of his chest had been crushed by the blow and his skull fractured in falling, and some time in the following night, without a sign or a sound, he went to his Maker. As for the captain, his wounds were grievous indeed, but not dangerous. No organ was fatally injured. Anderson's ball for it was Job that was shot first. It was Job that was shot first, had broken his shoulder blade and touched the lung, not badly. The second had only torn and displaced some muscles in the calf. He was sure to recover, the doctor said, but in the meantime, and for weeks to come, he must not walk nor move his arm, nor so much as speak when he could help it. My own accidental cut across my knuckles was a flea bite. Dr. Livesey patched it up with plaster and pulled my ears for me into the bargain. After dinner, the squire and the doctor sat by the captain's side a while in consultation, and when they had talked to their heart's content, it being a little past noon, the doctor took up his hat and pistols, girt on a cutlass, put the chart in his pocket, and with the musket over his shoulder crossed the palisade on the north side and set off briskly through the trees. Gray and I were sitting together at the far end of the blockhouse to be out of earshot of our officers consulting, and Gray took his pipe out of his mouth and fairly forgot to put it back again, so thunderstruck he was at this occurrence. "Why, in the name of Davy Jones," said he, "is Dr. Livesey mad?" "Why, no," says I. "He's about the last of this crew, for that, I take it." "Well, shipmate," said Gray, "mad he may not be, but if he's not, you mark my words, I am." "I take it," replied I. "The doctor has his idea, and if I am right, he's now going to see Ben Gunn." I was right, as appeared later, but in the meantime, the house being stifling hot and the little patch of sand inside the palisade ablaze with midday sun, I began to get another thought into my head, which was not by any means so right. What I began to do was to envy the doctor walking into the cool shadow of the woods with the birds about him and the pleasant smell of pines, while I sat grilling with my clothes stuck to the hot resin, and so much blood about me, so many poor dead bodies laying all around, that I took a disgust of the place that was almost as strong as fear. All the time I was washing out the blockhouse and then washing up things from dinner. This disgust and envy kept growing stronger and stronger, till at last, being near a bread bag and no one observing me, I took the first step towards my escapade and filled both pockets of my coat with biscuit. I was a fool, if you like, and certainly I was going to do a foolish thing, overbold act, but I was determined to do it, with all the precautions in my power. These biscuits, should anything befall me, would keep me at least from starving till far on the next day. The next thing I laid hold of was a brace of pistols, and as I already had powder and horn and bullets, I felt myself well supplied with arms. For as the scheme I had in my head, it was not a bad one in itself. I was to go down the sandy spit that divides the anchorage on the east from the open sea, find the white rock I had observed last evening, and ascertain whether it was there or not that Ben Gunn had hidden his boat. A thing quite worth doing, as I still believe. But as I was certain I should not be allowed to leave the enclosure, my only plan was to take French leave and slip out when nobody was watching, and that was so bad a way of doing it as made the thing itself wrong. But I was only a boy, and I had made my mind up. Well, as things at last fell out, I found an admirable opportunity. The squire and Gray were busy helping the captain with his bandages. The coast was clear. I made a bolt for it, over the stockade and into the thickest part of the trees. And before my absence was observed, I was out of cry of my companions. This was my second folly, far worse than the first, as I left but 2 sound men to guard the house. But like the first, it was a help towards saving all of us. I took my way straight for the east coast of the island, for I was determined to go down to the seaside of the spit to avoid all the chance of observation from the anchorage. It was already late afternoon, although still warm and sunny. As I continued to thread the tall woods, I could hear from far before me not only the continuous thunder of the surf, but a certain tossing of foliage and grinding of boughs, which showed me the sea had set in high and higher than usual. Soon cool draughts of air began to reach me, and a few steps further I came forth into the borders of the grove and saw the sea lying blue and the sun to the horizon, and the surf tumbling and tossing its foam along the beach. I have never seen the sea quiet round Treasure Island. The sun might blaze overhead, the air be without breath, the surface smooth and blue, but still these great rollers would be running along all the external coast, thundering and thundering by day and night, and I scarce believe there is one spot on the island where a man would be out of earshot of their noise. I walked along beside the surf with great enjoyment, till thinking I was now far enough to the south, I took the cover of some thick bushes and crept warily to the ridge of the spit. Behind me was the sea, in front of me the anchorage. The sea breeze, as though it was the sooner blown itself out by the unusual violence, was already at end. It had been succeeded by light, variable airs from south and southeast, carrying great banks of fog, and the anchorage under lee of Skeleton Island lay still, the leaden, as when we first entered it. The Hispaniola, in that unbroken mirror, was exactly portrayed from the truck to the waterline, and the Jolly Roger hanging from her at its peak. Alongside lay one of the gigs, silver in the stern sheets. Him I could always recognize, while a couple of the men were leaning over the stern bulwarks, one of them with a red cap and a very rouge that had and the very rogue that I had seen some hours before stride legs upon the palisade. Apparently they were talking and laughing, though at a distance, upwards of a mile. I could see, of course, hear no word of what was said. All at once there began the most horrid, unearthly screaming, which at first startled me badly, though I had soon remembered the voice of Captain Flint, and even thought I could make out the bird by her bright plumage as she sat perched upon the master's wrist. Soon after the jolly boat shoved off and pulled for ashore, The man with the red cap and his comrade went below by the cabin companion. Just about the same time the sun had gone down behind the spyglass, and as the fog was collecting rapidly, it began to grow dark in earnest. I saw I must lose no time if I were to find the boat that evening. The white rock, visible enough above the brush, was still some eighth of a mile further down the spit, and it took me a goodish while to get up there, while crawling often on all fours among the shrub. Night had almost come when I laid my hand on its rough sides. Right below it there was an exceedingly small hollow of green turf, hidden by the banks and thick underwood about knee-deep, that grew there very pleasantly, and in the center of the dell, sure enough, a little tent of goatskins, like that the gypsies carry about with them in England. I dropped into the hollow, lifted the side of the tent, and there was Ben Gunn's boat. Homemade for sure, if ever anything was homemade. A rude, lopsided framework of tough wood, and stretched upon that a covering of goatskin with a hair inside. The thing was extremely small, even for me, and I can hardly imagine that I could have floated with a full-sized man. There was one thwart set as low as possible, a kind of stretcher in the bows, and a double paddle for propulsion. I had not seen a corsail, such as ancient Britons made, but I have seen one since, and I can give you no fairer idea of Ben Gunn's boat than by saying it was like the first and worst coracle ever made by man. But the great advantage of the coracle it certainly possessed, for it's exceedingly light and portable. Well, now that I had found the boat, you would have thought I had had enough of Tronte for once. But in the meantime, I had taken another notion, and become obstinately fond of it, and I would have carried it out, I believe, in the teeth of Captain Smollett himself, if this was to slip out from under the cover of night, cut the Hispaniola adrift, and let her go ashore where she fancied. I had quite made up my mind that the mutineers, after the repulse of the morning, had nothing nearer their hearts than to up anchor and away to sea. This, I thought, it would be a fine thing to prevent, and now that I had seen how many left their watchmen unprovided a boat, I thought it might be done with a little risk. Down I sat, wait for darkness, and made a hearty meal of a biscuit. It was a night out of 10,000 for my purpose. The fog now buried all heaven. At last, rays of daylight dwindled and disappeared. Absolute blackness settled down on Treasure Island. And when at last I shouldered the coracle and groped my way stumbling out of the hollow where I had supped, there was but 2 points visible on the whole anchorage. One was the great fire on shore, by which the defeated pirates lay carouseling in the swamp. The other, a mere blur of light upon the darkness, indicated the position of the anchored ship. She had swung round to the ebb. Her bow was now towards me, and only lights on board were in the cabin, and what I saw was merely a reflection of the fog on the rays that flowed from the stern window. The ebb had already run some time, and I had to wade through a long belt of swampy sand, where I sank several times above the ankle before I came to the edge of the retreating water. The wading a little way in, with some strength and dexterity, set my coracle keel downwards on the surface. Chapter 23. The Ebb Tide Runs. The coracle, as I had ample reason to know before I was done with her, was a very safe boat for a person of my height and weight, both buoyant and clever in a sea way, but she was the most cross-grained, lopsided craft to manage. Do as you pleased, she always made more leeway than anything else, and by turning round and round was the maneuver she was best at. Even Ben Gunn himself has admitted that she was queer to handle till you knew her way. Certainly I did not know her way. She turned in every direction, but the one I was bound to go. The most part of the time we were broadside on, and I am very sure I never should have made the ship to all but for the tide. By good fortune, paddle as I pleased, the tide was still sweeping me down, and there lay the Hispaniola right in the fairway, hardly to be missed. First, she loomed before me like a blot of something yet blacker than darkness. Then her spars and hull began to take shape, and the next moment, as it seemed, for the farther I went, the brisker grew the current of the ebb. I was alongside her hawser, and I had laid hold. The hawser was taut as a bowstring, and the current was so strong she pulled upon the anchor. All round the hull, in blackness, the rippling current bubbled and chattered like a little mountain stream. One cut with my sea gully, and the Hispaniola would go humming down the tide. So far so good, but it next occurred to my recollection that a taut hawser suddenly cut is a thing as dangerous as a kicking horse. 10 to 1, if I were so foolhardy as to cut the Hispaniola from her anchor, I and the coracle would be knocked clean out of the water. This brought to me a full stop, and if fortune had not again particularly favored me, I should have had to abandon my design. But the light airs, which had begun blowing from the southeast and the south, hauled round after nightfall into the southwest. Just while I was meditating, a puff came, caught the Hispaniola, and forced her up into the current, and to my great joy, I felt the hawser slacken in my grasp, and the hand by which I held it dip for a second under water. With that, I made my mind up, took out my gully, opened it with my teeth, cut one strand after another till the vessel swung only by two. Then I lay quiet, waiting to sever the last, when the strain should be more and more lightened by a breath of wind. All this time I had heard the sound of loud voices from the cabin, but to say the truth, my mind had been so entirely taken up with the thoughts that I had scarcely given an ear. Now, however, when I had nothing else to do, I began to pay more heed. One I recognized for the coxswain's Israel Hands, that had been Flint's gunner in former days. The other was, of course, my friend, of the head of the red night cap. Both men were plainly the worse of drink, and they were still drinking, for even while I was listening, one of them, with a drunken cry, opened the stern window and threw something which I divined to be an empty bottle. But they were not only tipsy, it was plain that they were furiously angry. Oaths flew like hailstones, and every now and then there came forth such an explosion as I thought there was to end in blows. But each time the quarrel passed on, and the voices grumbled lower for a while, until the next crisis came, and in its turn passed away without result. On shore I could see the glow of the great campfire warmly through the shoreside trees. Someone was singing a dull, droning sailor's song, with a droop and a quaver at the end of every verse, and seemingly no end to it all but patience of the singer. I had heard it on the voyage more than once, and remembered these words: "But one man of her crew alive, what put to sea with 75?" And I thought it was a ditty rather too dolefully appropriate for a company that had met such cruel losses in the morning. But indeed, from what I saw, all these buccaneers were as callous as the sea they sailed on. At last the breeze came. The schooner sidled and drew near in the dark. I felt the hawser slacken once more, and with good, tough effort, cut the last fibers through. The breeze had but little action on the coracle, and I was almost instantly swept against the bows of the Hispaniola. At the same time, the schooner began to turn upon her heel, spinning slowly, end for end, across the current. I wrought like a fiend, for I expected every moment to be swamped, and since I found I could not push the coracle directly off, I now shoved straight astern. At length, I was clear of my dangerous neighbor, and just as I gave the last impulsion, my hands came across a light cord, and I was trailing overboard across the stern bulwarks. Instantly, I grasped it. Why I should have done so, I can hardly say. It was the first, mere instinct, but once I had it in my hands and found it fast, curiosity began to get the upper hand, and I determined I should have one look through the cabin window. I pulled in my hand over hand on the cord, and I judged myself near enough, rose at infinite risk to about half my height, and thus commanded the roof and a slice of the interior of the cabin. By this time, the schooner and her little consort were gliding pretty swiftly through the water. Indeed, we had already fetched up level with the campfire. The ship was talking, as sailors say, loudly, treading the innumerable ripples with an incessant weltering splash. And until I got my eye above the windowsill, I could not comprehend why the watchman had taken no alarm. Once I glanced, however, was sufficient. And it was only one glance, and I durst take from that unsteady skiff. It showed me Hans and his companion locked together in deadly wrestle, each with a hand upon each other's throat. I dropped upon the thwart again, none too soon, for I was near overboard. I could see nothing for the moment but these two furious, encrimsoned faces swaying together under the smoky lamp, and I shut my eyes and let them grow once more familiar with the darkness. The endless ballad had come to an end at last, and the whole diminished company about the campfire had broken into a chorus I had heard so often. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done the rest, yo ho, and a bottle of rum. I was just thinking how busy drinking and the devil were at the same moment in the cabin of the Hispaniola, when I was surprised by a sudden lurch of the coracle. At the same moment, she yawned sharply and seemed to change her course, and sped in the meantime, had strangely increased in speed. I opened my eyes at once. All around me were little ripples, combing over with a sharp, bristling sound and slightly phosphorescent. The Hispaniola herself, a few yards in whose wake I was still being whirled along, seemed to stagger in her course, and I saw her spars toss a little against the blackness of the night. Nay, I looked longer. I made sure, also, I was wheeling to the southward. I glanced over my shoulder, and my heart jumped against my ribs. There, right behind me, was the glow of the campfire. The current had turned my right angles, sweeping round along with it in a tall schooner, and the little dancing coracle, ever quickening, ever bubbling higher, ever muttering louder. It went spinning through the narrows for the open sea. Suddenly, the schooner in front of me gave violent yaw, turning perhaps through 20 degrees, and almost at the same moment, one shout followed another from on board. I could hear feet pounding on the companion ladder, and I knew that the two drunkards had at last been interrupted by their quarrel and awakened to the sense of their disaster. I lay down flat in the bottom of that wretched skiff, and I devoutly recommended my spirit to its maker. At the end of the straits, I made sure we must fall into some bar of raging breakers, where all my troubles would be ended speedily. And though I could perhaps bear to die, I could not bear to look upon my fate as it approached. So I must have lain for hours continually beaten to and fro upon the billows, now and again wetted with flying sprays, and never ceasing to expect death at the next plunge. Gradually, weariness grew upon me, and numbness. An occasional stupor fell upon my mind, even in the midst of my terrors, until sleep at last supervened, and in my sea-tossed coracle I lay and dreamed of home and the old Admiral Benbow. And that, my friends, is all for tonight. We will continue reading Treasure Island tomorrow night. So I hope to see you all back here at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. This has been Indiana Holmes. Love to you all.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.